always start with by acknowledging the First Nation territory from which we are broadcasting. So we are in the land of the Ohlone people, in the nation of Lishawn, commonly known as Oakland, California. We want to honor those ancestors whose legacy we take advantage of every day. Those who are buried in the shell mounds and hills around our home. In recognition of their victimization to the settler colonial project and their proximity to the ancestors of African people, we present this acknowledgement of our respect, our appreciation, and our bearing witness to their lives. We know they're still here with us, both in spirit and in the flesh, and we honor their presence in these lands. We honor their contribution to our lives. I want to encourage all of you to name the lands that you're in from where you're sitting in this conversation. Those lands whose ancestors lived before colonization. We want to welcome the spirits of those ancestors into the space and acknowledge their drive towards resistance to the colonial apparatus. And we want to join in solidarity with them. So if you can list the names of the lands that you're in the chat, that would be fantastic. And I always use this moment to remind people that if we don't know what lands we're in, if we're not aware of the tribes that came before us in the settler colonial land that we're in, there's a reason for that. That's not by accident. That's not just coincidence, but actually it's a part of the process and progress of dispossession. And so I would encourage all of you as educators, as people who are educating a new generation, to find those names, to remember those peoples, and to share that with young people so that memory can continue into the future. Yeah. We also want to honor the ancestors of Black children, especially those who committed their lives to the upliftment of Black people, educators, teachers, scholars, activists, whose work and intention created the space for this conversation to happen. In the spirit of libation, we always like to call their names, especially the names of those who have passed. So today, this particular conversation, we want to dedicate to Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and also Dr. Asa G. Hilliard III. We welcome you to type the names of ancestors in the chat who you would like to have present with us in this conversation today. That is ancestors, educators, teachers, scholars, activists who would be right to be present and whose contribution inspires you as an educator to pursue justice and pursue equity. We want to encourage you to invite these Agun in and charge you at the end of this conversation to remember them, thank them, and to invite them to leave. And I would hope that those names are going into the chat now. Thank you for sharing these names. Yes, Reverend Janice Somerville, June Jordan, love June Jordan. June Jordan was a professor of mine and a mentor of mine when I was a teenager. Yeah, we often call out Dr. Carter G. Woodson. We often call out Mary McLeod Bethune. You know, we try to be mindful that there were many educators and teachers and people working with Black children whose work we stand on, whose legacy we're building on, whose shoulders we're riding on, and we're carrying that legacy into the future. And all of our guests often acknowledge the scholars that inspired them, often remind people that they exist in a line of scholars, and that contribution is what is part of the pursuit of justice. That contribution is part of the pursuit of freedom. And so it's important to remember those names and say them, remember those people, and to once again, say their names. So thank you for all the wonderful acknowledgements, and thank you for the names that you've shared. Let me end this moment with a word of peace by saying Ashe. And then remind you that our examination of the education of Black children is really an interrogation of the future of Black people. We recognize that the very survival of African people around the world and in this country is dependent on the quality of educating Black children, the quality of the education they receive. The circumstances and challenges that they face now are often reflected in the future. So this is as much a conversation about the future, as this incredible work by Alicia B. Wormsley affirms, this 7-word forecast. There are Black people in the future, and we're in the process and working on curating who those people are, what they're thinking, how they're being educated. Before we introduce our renowned guest, Dr. Venus E. Evans Winters, we want to orient ourselves to the challenges and triumphs of Black children in these times. It's important to put our conversation in context, to measure the implications and consequences of a conversation about the challenges and triumphs of Black girls. So we've often, during the pandemic and this particular season of educating the Black children, we've often started this part with this image of a Black girl in school, inquiring, asking a question, being critical, with a pencil in her hand, the eraser, inspiring that she's open to making mistakes. She is wanting to learn, and she's also really being mindful of her health with the mask. All of this is like symbolism. And we're going to go through a series of slides that kind of contextualize many of the challenges that Black girls are facing. And as I present these, I want to say our conversation is about healing. Our conversation is not about trauma. So as I share these statistics, it's to provide the context for how most people have been informed about what educating Black girls means, what educating Black girls has looked like in this country. But our goal, our objective always in these conversations is not to rehash the pains, but actually to address them and to come with quality and effective solutions. So despite this image and this narrative that we've received about Black girl magic and these incredible examples, from Amanda Gorman to like Michelle Obama looking like a ninja, to Stacey Abrams really changing the face of democracy, and Kamala Harris changing the face of the vice presidency. There's this idea that Black girls and Black women in particular are thriving, that they're taking over the country. It's a narrative that we hear often in the mainstream media about Black women taking over the country, the rise of Black women. But let's provide some context. Here's a report released in 2018 about bias in DC schools that found that many schools banned traditional Black hairstyles or head coverings and had specific dress code requirements based on gender. And though California, the state of California, has dealt with that, many states have not addressed that at all. Research Georgetown's Law Center on Poverty and Equality in 2019 talk about the adultification bias, which is the notion that Black girls are more mature than white girls, leading them to being held to higher standards and disciplined more frequently and more harshly. I really like this particular image. Black girls are also disproportionately pulled out of class for being often labeled too loud, too assertive, labeled too sexually provocative, too defiant, too adult-like. And this is according to the Education Trust Report. And again, we can look at examples, just common kind of examples that show up in the media of police brutalizing Black girls, particularly in schools. And this image in the middle actually happened earlier this year, where this young high school student was body slammed by this school resource police officer. And before the pandemic, a similar incident occurred in North Carolina. So Black girls are 5 times more likely than white girls to be suspended at least once, and 4 times as likely as white girls to be arrested at school. And this is not to say that we're advocating for more white girls to be suspended and arrested. What we're saying is that it's a broken system when your only result and resolve is to exclude those who you are assigned and charged to educate. Y'all got that? And then we have this, and I showed this image before, February 2021. So this is just months ago. This 9-year-old girl was handcuffed and pepper sprayed in Rochester. And this is just a symbol. It's an example of what's happening around the country. Every incident that we get a news report on, you can bet that there are more incidents that we never hear, that never reach the news. So this is a common example of the adultification of Black girls and the impact that it's having on the lives and on the future of Black people. We wanted to show these slides, I wanted to show the range around the country. So I gave you a little Carolina, gave you some Rochester. This is a Florida statistic. And this is, again, just to demonstrate the pervasiveness of nationwide about how Black girls are being treated, what Black girls are experiencing in their educational spaces, what they're experiencing in relation to school. This is Texas. So again, we've really bounced all around the country to demonstrate that there can be statistics that are found that substantiate this idea of adultification, criminalization, brutality, etc. So let's go to our expert, Dr. Venus E. Evans Winters. You're gonna peek in with us now. Is a former professor of education at Illinois State University in the College of Education, with expertise in women and gender studies, African American studies, ethnic studies. She's the founder of Planet Venus. Get down with Planet Venus. And creator of the Write Like a Scholar program. Dr. Evans Winters is the author of several books, including Black Feminism in Education, Teaching Black Girls, and the Laurel Hill Reader. Look, man, look, if you haven't even seen the books, then that's on you, because you're the scholar. You have these scholars who are writing these incredible works, these scholars who are pioneers in the game of the academy. They write these works and then we never get them. Oftentimes the works are not accessed to us. So here is an example of a young, powerful, PhD who's offered scholarship on Black feminism in education, who's offered scholarship that transforms the way people do qualitative research, that decolonize qualitative research, who's using the words of Laurel Hill to affirm new possibilities for education. She's also a licensed social worker. She's also a youth advocate in private practice with experience serving in South Africa, West Africa, teaching in other places around the world. And the last thing I want to say before I just say, because I know she's going to go off, because that's how she does, is like, we know these NBA players, like we know these people who are Olympians, and we know them. They only compete once every 4 years, but we know their names like household names. But then we got these incredible Black scholars. We're not familiar with their work. We're not familiar with their genius. We don't even know their name. Y'all Black women scholars, especially, because y'all have a whole army. Y'all need baseball cards. Like, we need like scholar cards, hand out at schools, like, scholar cards, because all we know is W.E.B. Du Bois. So welcome, Venus. Welcome.
Greetings. Welcome all. Thank you for having me here. That's a heck of an introduction. If I could just have you and your team behind me every time I walk into a room, that would be awesome.
Hey, well, we're behind you. We're behind you, even if we're not there physically. We're definitely behind you in spirit. And we really appreciate you being here to help us contextualize the challenges that Black girls are dealing with in this system. So let's start with school discipline, because that seems to be the place where, everybody's mind will start there, even though that's not really what this conversation is about. But let's start there, because what I'm interested more about school discipline and those statistics are the implications of how girls are treated in the spaces that are charged to educate them, and explore what the girls are being taught. Like, what are Black families being taught? What is the Black community being taught by this constant criminalization, adultification, et cetera?
So that's a great question. It's interesting, Hadari, because back in 2005, I published the book Teaching Black Girls, 2005. And it was at that time that, and this is your community is going to love this, your audience. It was at that time in 2005. And as you know, any academic research, it takes 3 to 5 years just to get on the shelf. So we're looking back 3 to 5 years from the time that book was published. So imagine as early as the 2000s, we had already noticed that Black girls who were doing what they were supposed to be doing, Black girls who were, basically living in ways that we thought they should be performing Black girlhood, those girls were being punished in schools. Because if you look at the book Teaching Black Girls, you actually see I was studying high performing girls. So girls who were getting straight A's, they were the top in their class. And guess what, Dari? They were still being reprimanded at school. Teachers were still bullying them. They still had higher suspension rates, than their white peers, their white female peers, and in some cases, even Black boys. So it was almost as if they was being pushed out of school simply for being smart, simply for being critical of their conditions in school, simply for being Black and girl. Okay. So later on in 2014, so mind you, that was in 2005 when I documented that with a systematic study. Okay. So I'm just going to use these words, because that's how people take us seriously. But then in 2014, the African American Policy Forum, which I am the Black Girls Research Initiatives Coordinator for, right? The African American Policy Forum, they published a study, Black Girls Matters. And I do want everybody to check out that report, Black Girls Matter at African American Policy Forum, simply because it started the contemporary conversation around how Black girls are treated in schools. It did not give as much attention as my work did to say girls who are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay, that's how I translate high performing. Girls who are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay. Right. But this study, BGM, the Black Girls Matter report, it actually exposed, especially on the East Coast, New York and Boston, right? That area, that Black girls were being disciplined and punished and pushed out of school, regardless, if they were getting high grades or not. In fact, it was actually finding the opposite. It's kind of hard to have time and seats, right? And to enjoy your schooling experiences if you're going through metal detectors. Imagine adult males who aren't police officers, by the way, who aren't trained teachers, by the way, who aren't social workers, policing your body physically. So the same pat downs and scans that we're getting at airports, they are getting that starting off at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning in their schools. So that's now what Monique Morris is referring to as push out and pathways to criminalization. Many Black girls, many African girls in this country, our first contact with the criminal and justice system is actually through schools. So that school, in fact, I just got a text about this yesterday. That school referral, that referral to the office, that teacher's referral to the office can become a referral to juvenile detention court or juvenile court. That contact with juvenile court can become time in the juvenile system, right? Or court supervision. So Hadari, believe it or not, there are myths about who these school resource officers or who these police officers are slamming inside of our classrooms. And trust you me, even when you do hear many of the horror stories, even if those girls aren't your ideal students, believe it or not, these girls are getting in trouble for small infractions. I mean, things like me and Candace, your wife will get in trouble for. We're critical. We're going to speak back up if we don't agree with the curriculum or with what the teacher is saying. We're also protective. We've been taught to be protective. If we see another child is being humiliated, especially another Black girl or a child who can't defend themselves, we're more likely to take up for that child because that's how we've been reared. That's good parenting. That's how we've been socialized as Black girls in Black families and Black communities. The other thing is, besides, being punished for insubordination, meaning talking out of turn. If that's the case, we're all in trouble, right? They're also being punished. Most of it is dress code violations. When you look at these major cities, right? LA, Chicago, Baltimore, it's dress code violation. They may have on sleeveless shirts and they weren't supposed to wear sleeveless shirts to school, something like that, right? So these are minor infractions that are pushing them out of school, but also leading them to the juvenile justice and justice system.
So what, that's kind of, what do you think it's saying to families about education? What do you think it's communicating to these girls about their future? Not just the girls who are criminalized because they're not achieving, but also the high achieving girls. Like, what is it? What is it telling them about their future? You know, what are the implications of that type of body policing and surveillance and intervention in their lives long term? You know, from your perspective as a social worker, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to borrow from my son. So my son said, Mom, these schools they are pretty much juvenile detention centers.
Mm,
And so I'm not saying that they are, but to respond to your question, what are they doing to the minds and psyches of our children, high performing children and neurotypical children? Basically what it's doing is teaching them that schools are holding cells.
mm,
They're holding cells, if you will. It's almost like you're going to come here, you're going to do your time. Think about that. You're
mm,
going to do your time, and we'll tell you when it's time for you to leave. If you want to take it a step further, we want to look at who schools are really designed for, who they're meant for, who they're working for. By the way, they're not working for the majority of American students. By the way, that's why we have school shootings with these white boys trying to shoot up the schools. That's why these white girls are bullying people, passive aggressively. Okay, and that's why teachers are now reporting high rates of mental illness and crises. Okay, so to be clear, our schools, as they aren't working for many. It's almost like a purgatory.
mm, mm,
It's a purgatory. So imagine that in those 4 years, you're being judged and somebody else is deciding your fate
mm,
about where do you go next. Is it going to be college? Is it going to be entry level minimum wage jobs? I didn't say a living wage, a minimum wage job. Or are you going to be tracked into, say, college? And as you know, college is now setting us up for lifelong debt. So that's the way our kids are saying it. It's purgatory. I have to suffer until my fate is decided. And that's the wrong message to send to developing minds.
mm. Yeah, I often also think, like, what is your take on what the systems and the institutions learn from the practice? Like, what are the sicknesses that you see institutionally that are pervasive and don't bode well for the future? And I feel like you exposed one when we were on Hard Knock the other day. You exposed one, which is that you left the academy. That's exposing one right there. So we
I
can
broke
talk a
up with
little.
my oppressor.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can talk a little bit about your breakup, but let's also think about, like, how does this institutional practice become so routine that it's pervasive? What's happening in Florida is happening in Texas. What's happening in Texas is what's happening in New York or DC or like you said, Baltimore or LA. Those two cities are on opposite sides of the United States of America. The people from those cities don't necessarily talk to each other. They're certainly not meeting on Zoom to plot a conspiracy against Black girls, but yet these institutional practices, though. So,
Mm-hmm.
so let's,
Yeah. They don't spend every waking hour, planning our demise, but they damn sure ain't spending every waking hour trying to figure out how to let us live. So if you look at those babies, I want to look at those little babies. If we can't go back one slide, hope I don't take us off. Y'all, let's look at them. Let's see them. That's who we wake up for. That's who we rest and restore for every night. Because what you are witnessing here is presence, Black girl presence. They're human. So imagine an educational system that has the ability to strip them of their humanity. Because we've seen a long view. Let's keep it real here, y'all, okay? Because we've seen a long view. We know that we're asking them for the next 12 years to survive deculturalization in our schools, meaning stripping them of their culture. And that's through curriculum, that's through policies, that's through the way that we teach, the way that we interact with them. And we are witnessing their dehumanization. That's when you make someone a number, another statistic. We objectify them. So because many of us here as adults, we have the long view, right? We're educators, we're healers, we're social workers, we're after school providers, right? We're coaches, right? PE, basketball, all that stuff. We know because we know the long view. If we take the little girl in the front from the little girl in the back, they're going to face some challenges. They're going to face challenges that other citizens are protected from. And some of that is going to have little to do with just what goes on in their family. So Hadari, a lot of what we see today from a policy perspective focuses so much on the brokenness of the Black family. And we're not giving enough attention to who these girls are going to spend much of their time, their childhood time with. And that's going to be a young, white female from the suburbs. And it's scary because when I look at the little girl in the front and I go all the way through the back, for the most part, just looking at them objectively, right? They don't have much in common with that white female teacher from a middle-class suburb. And research shows, this is not Dr. V talking, it's the research. That's my disclaimer. Research shows that white young women have the lowest self-esteem than any other group in this country. Whereas research shows that Black girls have the highest self-esteem than any other group in this country, and they have the highest capacity for leadership. So we're talking about a cocktail for disaster. So what we need brave Black people who are going to enculturate these young white women into the ways of life of our children, our families, our community, so that they could appropriately work with and teach and help raise our kids, because they are. We're leaving the educational sector, but we also need healthy Black adults, Hadari, healthy. And I'm talking about in a holistic way, spiritually healthy, culturally healthy, educationally healthy, and physically healthy, to present and work with our children before school, after school, Saturday schools, early morning schools, in the spirit of the Black Panthers. That's what's going to be called for to save us.
This is Dr. Venus Evans Winters. I hope y'all are taking notes and you know, because she's taking names. Statistics bear out that since the 60s to now, you know, a lot of the kind of trauma-informed lens on Black education focuses on mass incarceration. But I like to add this slide to say that it is true that since 1968, college enrollment for Black children has increased. High school dropout rates for Black children have decreased. Now, sometimes you can look at any statistic and you can see it as a positive and negative. You can put any lens on the way that you're particularly looking at a thing. It may seem like it's better and greater now than before 1968. That's a whole argument that I'm not having right now. we have a whole conversation about that, but we're not doing the compare now to 1968. We are just saying, though, that the statistic would bear this notion that even with the dramatic rise of mass incarceration, specifically of Black children and Black youth, there's still an increased enrollment in college and a decrease in the dropout rate. Now, this increase in college has not led to more wealth. So it's not like integration has all of a sudden closed some gap. It closed this dropout. It's starting to close the dropout gap. It's closing the college enrollment gap, but that's not translating to decreasing the gaps in wealth, housing, etc. Like, it's really not addressing that. So that's just to say, you know, it's true that college has not closed the gaps. Integration is not proven to effectively deal with the racial divide. I don't know if you want to platform from that.
Yeah, so let's put this in the context of Black girls and Black women for a moment, if we can. As you pointed out, more Black people are going into college. More Black people are getting bachelor's degrees and other degrees. And actually, Black women at this time, disproportionately compared to other gender groups, we are going into colleges and universities and post bachelorette careers more than our male counterparts. Okay, to be clear, compared to other gender groups. All right. But as you also pointed out too, Hadari, I said educational, I said economic health, educational health, cultural health, spiritual health. And so now what we're looking at is the depth, the death too, but that's psychological death, but the debt from this college, contact and exposure. And so what you're looking at just in the last 10 years, maybe 15 years, we're just not paying attention to the statistics. But quite frankly, yes, more Black women are going into colleges and universities, right? And look at the career choices. We're choosing mostly education. We're actually, in my opinion, oversaturated in education, but that's my opinion. Just because when you look at that, what fields we're going into like student support services and higher ed. We're all trying to get into these tenure track faculty positions and teaching institutions, but the truth is, it's just not enough spaces. Mm-hmm. And also those careers aren't necessarily keeping up with inflation. And also we're more likely to get these doctorate degrees, these postmaster's degrees, but we're least likely to be hired into tenure track positions. We're least likely to get paid as our peers, and we're least likely to get tenure if we do get in, and it's a serious pay gap. If you go to my LinkedIn, I say pay Black women, right? I said pay Black women equitably, right? Mm-hmm. And we're also more likely to go into the helping fields. We're more likely to be the nannies and the support services in these colleges and universities, which doesn't necessarily provide economic security. Now, as a people, we've always valued knowledge. We've always valued knowledge. So I'm not saying don't get those degrees. I'm not saying don't get those papers, but we have to hold our government accountable. Right now, many Black women disproportionately, and our Latinx sisters, they are definitely, we're keeping the universities' doors open off our backs. White men just aren't going to college.
Speak on that, please.
Yeah. So I mean, the meaning that you're going to get in. You're going to get in. But over the last 10, 15 years, research shows that city and state governments are disinvesting in higher education. That's different from when I went to college. They're disinvesting. Could you imagine that? Public institutions. But also the federal government is disinvesting or has not invested as much in higher education. So what that means is we're paying out of pocket. We're paying through high interest loans. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? So we're actually going into debt in order to get these degrees, and the institutions and these corporate entities, corporate media, they're all in cahoots. It's not going to be a coincidence that now me and Tiffany from the block, who's 20 years younger than me, our Instagrams, our Facebooks are going to loop up and link up because Instagram, Facebook, corporate media wants to convince Tiffany, oh my God, you could be like Dr. V and get a degree, higher ed, research, right, degree, exposure. Look at her. She looks healthy. You want what she got, right? So what does Tiffany from the block say? Oh, I want to get a college education too. The difference is what these algorithms aren't telling you is that when I went to school, we paid lower interest rates. We were more likely to have our education subsidized, right? And we were more likely to go for free. I didn't pay for master's and PhD degrees, and I was on a grant for undergrad. Mm-hmm. You see, but the algorithm is not going to tell you that. So what we have to do is we have to figure out, okay, why are we going into these colleges and universities in the first place? Okay. And I would say read Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro, my go-to. Still and read W.E.B. Du Bois like after he got mad. When he did what I did. When he was like, deuces, I'm going to college. So just know why you're going to college. Why are you going to college and university, especially post, bachelor's? What is your purpose? How will it serve the community? How will it serve your nation in your tribe? How would it serve Black girls?
Do you feel as a scholar that your role in the academy limited your ability to do some of those things?
Oh, that's a good question, bro. You gonna have to ask that during drink time. During cocktails. That's a setup. Dang, Shayna and Candace, y'all ain't tell me Hadari was gonna be setting me up.
No, I'm not trying to set you up. I'm just more saying, I'm not trying to set you up. I don't want you to say anything that you're not comfortable saying.
No, I think it's a good and fair question. I'm more than prepared to respond to it. I believe that my work in the academy has allowed me to be in spaces where I could influence the reimagining of theory, of research. Mm-hmm. So now, mind you, I started this Black girls work a long time ago. Mm-hmm. So some of the conversations we're hearing now, it was because I was brave enough or I didn't know enough. See, the story that we don't tell is that I've been in school since I was 3. Mm. I started out in pre-K and never stopped. Okay, it wasn't pre-K, it was Head Start, y'all. I just like to sound fancy, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I started in Head Start. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and I matriculated all the way through to my doctorate. So I had a PhD at 26, tenure track 27, etc. But Hadari, I think the difference was definitely my preparation. So I do come from a working class family on the south side of Chicago, born in Inglewood to a teenage mom who had my brother at 16, me at 17, and my sister at 18. And as you know, I was grounded, rooted in the African tradition. I was grounded and rooted in what we call the community. That means a Pan-African community. And so I would just say this, that some of us there are many Black people like this, actually. They're all around you. You wouldn't even believe it. Some of our most talented folks, they're there. You're there. Candace is there, right? We're here. But some of us were socialized actually to infiltrate these systems. So we're actually taught to get education by any means necessary and use it against white supremacy. That's the difference. So in fact, I'll be honest with you, Hadari, I think what makes me different, and I had to reflect on this later as an adult, because it wasn't necessarily working in my favor. I was actually in many ways taught to yield respect to all people in the same way that you want respect. So it's not that all white people are evil, but not all white people deserve your respect, right? And so whereas now what I'm seeing in many of our communities, amongst our children, even adults, our elders, okay, let's be clear, is we have a problem in this country with white superiority and Black inferiority. White superiority, Black inferiority. So when I entered the educational system, especially when I started to be educated around white people, the problem is that I was taught as a child that I was morally, culturally, and intellectually superior to white people.
Was that
that's not a good thing.
I mean, it depends on the context of whether or not that's good. So maybe I'll ask the question, like, was that the armor that you needed to accomplish the things that you accomplished and become who you became? Like, and I'm not just speaking personally to Dr. V, like I'm thinking about Black girls in general. Like, is that the kind of armor that Black girls need to survive the toxicity of these systems that seem to be so pervasively anti-Black and anti-Black girl specifically, that I don't know if it's a bad thing to walk into that kind of place believing that you're better. Like, I don't know. I'm not sure that that's a bad thing, because look what you were able to become as a result of that. And if you went in there feeling like you were less than, or even like you were equal, what does it mean to be equal to a system that oppresses you or that diminishes your humanity? So I don't know. Maybe that's just me popping off.
Well, I was just thinking too, from my spiritual beliefs, we don't necessarily attach judgments to ways of being or choices or behavior. So I wouldn't say that it was necessarily good or bad that I was raised to think that Black people were superior to white people. But I do, when I hear you talk, we should take pause, because there are Black people who can really, like, I mean, they have to think about that, right? Like, wait a minute, what does that mean that Black people are morally, culturally, and intellectually superior to white people, right? So it's not that it's good or bad, but I definitely had to shift and adjust because it doesn't work for me in Eurocentric uh, institutions that serve to further white supremacy and Black inferiority.
Say more about that.
So basically, I think what's happening is, and what we're calling for is oppositional consciousness. So if anything, my family and my community were preparing me for an oppositional stance. And in that oppositional stance, right, we are less concerned with whiteness and what white people are thinking or white sentiments, right? And we're more concerned with what are the needs of the family, the community, the nation, and the tribe. So we just have two different focuses.
Mm-hmm. No, I get it. I get it. And I think this particular slide, the not weeping, first of all, stands out to me. The not weeping, like not feeling sorry for ourselves, not wallowing in lament, and this is a African American characteristic. I'm not, I mean, I know a lot about history. I study a lot of Black history, but I don't really know of a culture globally that has transformed weeping and wailing into funk. Like I don't, that has learned how to make that sorrow a source of joy. And then this sharpening my oyster knife before the colon, sharpening my oyster knives are very sharp already. So the idea of sharpening this knife to carve something, I think of carving something, or like removing something, scraping something out that is attached inside, and you're like carving it out. And then the demarginalizing intellectual activism, that's a bit about what we're talking about here. And I think this is a place where a lot of youth development workers, a lot of educators who have kind of sentiments towards racial justice, sentiments towards restorative justice, sentiments about the pain of particular communities are facing, and that is their North Star, right? But they enter these institutions recognizing that from jump, I'm marginalized as a result, which is what you're describing. I'm marginalizing the staff meeting because for me, my North Star is this child, and for them, their North Star is this institution. And so this not weeping, sharpening my oyster knife, demarginalizing intellectual activism, like that title is just symbolic of a lot of things. So what was this, one? And then two, what were you thinking when you came up with that? Like, what is that?
Yeah, so this was a presentation actually organized by Dr. Malik Hensfield. He's out of, now he's at Loyola University in Chicago. He comes out of the field, I believe, of school psychology, and his graduate, and then also Dr. Janice Bird, which is like a graduate SIG coordinator or something at AERA, and she's also out of school counseling, right? And so for this particular presentation at AERA, I had came up with this. This is borrowed from Zora Neale Hurston. And so they were basically asking her, so, hey, how do you feel about, something, and as it related to, say, white people, whiteness, right? She was like, not weeping, sharpening my oyster knife. Okay. And then people thought that I should be weeping. I might be sad. Oh my gosh, she's been hit by the pandemic. Maybe that's why she quit. Well, I didn't. I mean, on December 15th at 12 p.m. Central Time, 2020, I'm sorry, I broke up with my oppressor as a full professor of education. So everything I was just talking about, I got tenure. I was promoted to associate professor. I became full professor. I represented less than 2% of all faculty, men, women, white, Asian, across the country. Less than 2% had made it to where I made it. And as you can see, I've sold a lot of books. Right? But if you know the history of the civil rights movement, they had called for 5 fields, 5 groups of professionals that Black people were going to need. I can't even say they're just professionals, but 5 helping fields that Black people should go into. In particular, they said we were going to need lawyers. They predicted a time like this. They predicted a time when a police officer would put his neck on put his knee on a Black man's neck in broad daylight. Who was going to represent and defend that Black man's family and his life? These Black girls being slammed. Who was going to take those cases to court? These Black girls being killed at the hands of police officers, right? So that was predicted. They also called for Black nurses. Here we are in COVID-19. Right? How many Black women are actually prepared to be nurses? Now, what's interesting, Hadari, is that we know for a fact that our generation, our cohort, was being recruited vastly into healthcare. Remember, they were coming into our high schools, talking to girls as early as 8th grade and saying, you should go to this high school where we'll have you become a nurse. You know, in your junior, senior year, you can get a job, and then you're going to get your bachelor's in nursing. Well, Hadar, we woke up 20 years later, and most of those women are stuck as CNAs. And so what happened is, because I'm a sociologist, from a sociological perspective, most people don't know this, but your government, these universities, they're economists, they're predicting the state of America, like where we're going to be at 25 years in advance, 50 years in advance. And what's interesting is they already knew that we would have a time like now, right? Overpopulation, right? Too many people living in small amount of spaces, climate issues, white people live longer than are living longer than ever. So we have more older white people, but we have younger Black people.
Right.
Their population is actually dying off, literally dying off. Our population, African Americans, is stagnant, and the Latinx population is the fastest growing population, has the highest birth rate in this country, right? So they knew we would be here. So really what they did is they prepared Black girls to wipe the ass of old white people. I'm sorry, can I say that? I'm sorry, guys, I forgot. Please.
You can say that. Yeah, you absolutely can say that. And I just bow my head because, man, oh.
Okay, so we do need Black nurses, and we're in the middle of a mental health crisis. We're in the middle of a health crisis as well. So the other thing they call for were Black teachers. Right now, we have the biggest shortage of Black teachers. Look what happened when the pandemic hit. We did not have people who were prepared to teach their own children at home. Think about that. We did not have childcare providers for our own children at that moment, and we knew that we were the so-called essential workers. You hear what I'm saying? And so the other thing they called for was Black social workers. So I have a master's in social work. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I am a therapist in private practice. I'm also a certified clinical trauma professional. I'm also a certified clinical complex PTSD professional. You understand? So I had to leave. I had to jump ship because I had to triage my own people, Hadari. It was unethical, if not immoral, for me to triage some 18-year-old, 19-year-old white girl while my people were dying mentally and physically in my own neighborhood, in my own community, in our country that our foremothers and forefathers built.
There's a lot there. So yeah, there's a lot there. I think let's talk about what that's led to. Well, first, let's say in the academy, you know, based on who's coming out of credentialing programs, schools of education, et cetera, what's being fed to our communities then is primarily white women who have been triaged in the academy.
Yes,
Right?
yes. Yeah, I mean, we currently do have a client-based, customer-based system in many universities across the country. And so yes, a lot of people right now are appeasing whiteness.
Speak on what's appeasing whiteness.
So we've all heard of white fragility.
Yeah.
And so what happens is in many of our institutions, you're trying not to upset your ideal customer,
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
typical student. Right now, white femininity is the norm. White cisgender heterosexual whiteness is the norm, to be
Mm-hmm.
clear.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really hard to shift, and change systems, curriculum, what we're teaching, how we're teaching, if it's going to upset the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And from a Black girl's perspective, right? A Black woman's perspective, what's happening, Hadari, is when 20, 30 years ago, when I started in the academy, high school, undergrad, grad, a lot of attention based off the AAUW report on the state of girls. I believe that was 1994. Okay, so I'm giving out my age at this point. And I remember they were focusing so much on we need education for girls, and they meant white girls, right? And Dr. Monique Morris and I talk about that in her films, talked about in the book, etc. And they said, okay, we have to help these white girls. Their self-esteem is low. They're not going into math and science. They're feeling ostracized in the classroom, overlooked. And so when I entered the academy as an undergrad and then later as a grad, I said, wait a minute, that's not the story of Black girls. Black girls were footnotes in those books. And we all remember this, right? We were mere footnotes, an asterisk. Well, we only had one Black girl, and she was adopted by a white family. No, I'm just kidding. And so, right, but they were mere footnote. And I said, that's not our stories, because Black girls were actually, at the time, we were surviving. I'm not going to say thriving. We were doing what we could in those schools, in those settings. And so when you think about it, it's not anything new to shift the culture of institutions, because white women were calling for that back in 1994, the late 1990s. By the time, the 2000s came about, and currently now much curriculum does its best to try to fit in girls. But who is that girl? Who is that typical teacher? Who is that typical social worker? They don't see us. They're appeasing white femininity, whiteness. That's their ideal social worker. That's their ideal teacher. That's their ideal daycare provider. That's their ideal nurse. That's their ideal, so yeah, so we will be overlooked and ignored if we continue to do business as usual.
Yeah, it's also like the standard. It's like this white standard of what it means to be human, and what it means to be a professional, what it means to be a student, what it even means to look ready to learn. I think that just goes back to the dress code issue or the hairstyle issue. It's like, you're wearing cut off sleeves and you have braided hair, you don't look ready to learn. It's like, wait, what? Or you were wearing the same clothes that you wore yesterday, so you're not ready to learn. And I think that you're speaking to the fact that Black life has not been factored in as a significant contributor to the educational experience. That it reminds me of what we often hear about indigenous schooling, and kind of the, save the man, remove the native, save the man kind of attitude. Is super hyper colonial, but also very like kind and nice. It's like colonial with like this smile and this like procedure. This is just the way it's been. You know what I mean? It's like a wallow in the routine. It just becomes like not as mediocrity as the standard, as suffering as the standard. It's almost expected. Like, yeah, it's going to be hard for you. Like, this is what we tell girls. I know I told my daughters this. I have 3 daughters, by the way, and only one of them is still in this school system. And we tell our daughters this, like, it's going to be rough. Like, it's going to be tough. Like, you're going to experience this public school. Yeah, it's going to be hard. Like, every teacher is not going to support you. Like, I don't know. My daughter would see the counselor. I'd be like, what'd the counselor say? Who is this counselor? What did the counselor look like? It's just like we're in Chris Chapman, when he was talking about, because we had him as a guest in February, talking particularly about African-American male achievement and the resources that Barack Obama in particular put into the MBK initiative, Men and Boys Initiative, Black and Latino boys. And he was just talking about the toxicity of the school system and the need to inoculate Black children to actually experience this system. And then what you're describing in the academy is almost a replication of what these girls are experiencing in their K-12 kind of experience.
And let's pull it back to K-12, because I think, for me, intuitively, I'm talking from the top down. I'm looking at what's happening with our, so-called preparation programs, right? Who's teaching teachers, basically, who's teaching educational policy, who's teaching and designing curriculum, who's preparing our social workers, who's, that next group. We barely do that. But these women who are here, including myself, we were in K-12 before. And so I have that wide lens. I have a wider view, for the simple fact that now we're just now starting to see the residual effects of a very oppressive but accepted schooling system. So when you showed one of the slides that looked at the trajectory of Black education in America, right? We should be asking ourselves, though, at what cost? We talked about the economic cost. We didn't talk about the psychological cost.
So let's talk about psychological and cultural cost real quick. And I know that I put this slide in. I didn't show you this slide last time when we were talking, but I put this slide in because I know you often talk about the divine masculine, divine feminine, and use African and Afrocentric symbolism to really get a grounded understanding of kind of the Black lens on these experiences that we're fed through a white lens. So, let's talk a little bit about the impact culturally, the impact psychologically, and then that long-term implication for, our future, our ramifications. If we're looking all the way back in the past and things are flipped upside down, then what are we looking at when we're looking at the psychological and cultural cost?
Yeah, so let's start with the cultural cost. I think that's obvious, right? Many of us, if you watch TV, if you watch Netflix now, I think everybody podcast is talking about it. And I'm a whistleblower. I'm the middle child. I'm telling it all because I got the win, right? I'm saying I got somebody older looking at me, somebody younger. I'm whistleblower. Okay, so I think that we've come to accept that a part of imperialism, a part of colonization, is the oppressor, right? The captating, right? The person doing the captivating, right? Will impose their culture onto the dominated, onto the colonized, right? We've come to accept that as our truth and our fate. But what happens is with the American educational system by design is, Hadari, they've taught us to forget. This is a little different now because of desegregation patterns, right? And access to institutions and to neighborhoods that before we weren't certainly permitted into. And based off these police shootings and killings, hell, maybe we're still not permitted into them. Maybe it's an illusion. I don't know. But we've become, we're still segregated. The US is very segregated, don't get me wrong, but we're starting to pattern white ways of living, white middle class ways of living. So when I was growing up, for example, you have these big houses, these big ass houses in Chicago, right? And they're in working class neighborhoods, but they're like 2-3 levels. Your family all lived under that roof.
Yep.
Your family all lived under that roof. So even if your mama, like my mama, had a kid at 16, 17, right? As a teenager, by the way, that wasn't a thing. There was nothing called a teenage mother back then. When these white men was raping us, and they still are, it wasn't called teen pregnancy or teen parenthood. That was another policy, a white supremacy policy. So they had to come up with something to coin it. It wasn't even called teen pregnancy, right? That's something of the 60s, well, 70s, 80s, and 90s that it became proliferated through Reaganomics. But nonetheless, right? Even if you weren't, you were going to be taught how to be a good mother. You were going to be taught how to be a good caregiver, because your mama was in there under the roof with you, your grandmama, your aunties, your big sisters, right? We were all still there. Right now, Hadari, what happens is when we get education and access to the middle class, we're actually, Black people, we're more likely to move away from our family. Now, this is interesting because in this economic state in the US, white older adolescents, meaning those who just graduated from college, they're actually living with their parents longer. But due to some of the debt we just talked about, many Black people aren't even homeowners. So we can't even rescue our kids if something comes up. They're gonna, you know what I'm saying? So it's harder for that college age student to just move back, drop back in with us. And we have less help. We have less resources. Okay. So culturally, we're actually forgetting. So even if we were exposed to white people, white supremacy, and whiteness just 30, 40, 50 years ago, well, we had each other, right? To remember, oh no, that buffet that they feed y'all, that table that y'all want to be a part of, that food is poisoned. So when people say, I want to sit at the table, I'm gonna bring my own chair. that Hadari, I'm not eating that food. It's poison. Like I don't want none of it. I'm saying, you see how I didn't curse though. I did not curse.
No, but it's interesting. I mean, there's a Malcolm X quote about that, talking about, don't you think somebody spit in that sandwich? Like that's a Muhammad Ali. Don't you think somebody spit in that sandwich?
Yeah. So I mean, that buffet is poison. We know, and I want to be clear because people get scared. Black people and white people, not all. You know, it's funny because white people listen to this and be like, "Oh, okay," but Black people, they get scared. Oh my God! But not all white people are bad. That's not what I'm saying. It's okay. My problem is not with Joe Smo. It's not even with Karen and Becky. I don't care. I don't even know nobody named Becky, to be honest with you. I just don't care. I'm talking about a system. I'm talking about a political and economic and educational system that every day puts policies in place to keep us down or to really annihilate us. You're thinking about annihilation when you're talking about prisons and the death sentence. Let's be clear, right? Shoot to kill. I mean, right? But you're talking about keeping us down when you're talking about, well, we don't have to pay them at the same rate. We don't have to give them access to affordable housing, you know, even though we're all paying our taxes. We don't have to give them the best education, right? When the school down the street got 3 pools, right? So think of this, the school got 3 pools and our kids can't even get swimming because the pool ain't worked in 50 years, right?
And it's all justified through the Supreme Court.
And it's all justified.
All authorized through court cases that we're not familiar with anymore, but we're big when they happen to chip away every moment, chip away a little bit at a time at every game that was accomplished. And we talked a little bit about this in Hard Knock, on our Hard Knock radio conversation, just the kind of emphasis of a system to put the focus on the individual and to blame the individual for whatever circumstance, situation, whether it's, you know, you have type 2 diabetes, to whether it's, you know, you don't know how to read, it's like your fault rather than look, and the institution then throws up its hands. You know, a teacher can literally fail every student in their class and they'll still be there the next semester teaching that same, another group of kids will just be filtered right.
They move them around. They shuffle. Yeah, they shuffle.
So that idea that you know, the system never fails, it's individuals that fail. And you're really talking about putting the focus back on the institution and the system.
Yeah, and we have to as a people, as a community, even in coalition, we have to remember that we're talking about systems and sets of policies. We're not talking about your best friend or you once knew. We and I think it was Malcolm X who said, I'm paraphrasing here, I don't hate white people. I love Black people.
Mm-hmm.
To love Black people don't mean that you have to hate white people, but I don't want to change the focus. So cultural imperialism, right? Education is cultural imperialism. We've accepted that. So it basically, if you come to this country, you have to learn our language, you have to walk, speak, and worship like us. That's what cultural imperialism is. We've accepted that as a way of life in the US, right? But what we talk less about is this concept called psychological warfare or intellectual warfare, to cite Jacob Carruthers. Okay, so it's this idea that education is culture. So there are people every day who are sitting around a table who are deciding what curriculum or what our kids will be taught and what they won't be taught. Mm-hmm. Majority of our public schools now are predominantly Black and brown, but we're still learning the dominating culture's ways of life, right? And I'm not even going to talk about culturally responsive pedagogy and teaching, because you've had people smarter than me on here to talk about that. Like, they came up with it. Dr. Gloria Lance's building, right? She knows it through and through. But let's talk about this idea of intellectual warfare. This is the idea that education is not only used as a tool of the state or a way of further colonizing a group of people or keeping them down or annihilating them, right? But we also have to talk about the psychological side of it. Hadari, let me tell you and Candace this: who you put in front of your children matters. Who you put in front of your children matters. I don't care if they're watching this on Instagram, right? Facebook has been exposed this week. Facebook don't cut us off Zoom and don't block this video if when it's posted.
Let this continue.
Let this continue. Okay, please. Okay, so they who will not be named was exposed, for how this works. So any Instagram, any visuals, Instagram, Facebook, videos. Remember, we used to watch MTV, right? Even your teachers, even your police officers, your firefighters, your community workers, your youth care workers, your librarians, who you put in front of your children, that's who they become. Period. Who do you put in their ear? Hadari, I grew up in the hip hop. I grew up at the age of hip hop when it was coming into mainstream. I used to go into my brother's room, and the way that I grew up, we were literally listening to Farrakhan in one speaker, but then we would also be listening to Eazy-E, NWA, basically, right? And then when I came to consciousness, I said, oh my God, there's this woman called MC Light. Oh my God, I lost my mind. Oh my God. Like, oh wow. And then you remember, right? So imagine I got Farrakhan in my ear, NWA in my ear, and now MC Light is saying light as a rock, right? And light as a, you're like, oh, light as a feather. You're like, what? And UNIT, why, right? Mm-hmm. I'm becoming all of those. Mm-hmm. I'm becoming all of those. So now what's happening is we have definitely more visual representation. We have more auditorial representation of what we're hearing, right? In our ears, right? So imagine the messages. I'm not trying to say NWA was ideal. In fact, my brother and them, the reason why I was sneaking into their rooms is because our parents didn't want them listening to it, to be clear. Mm-hmm. I want to hear that shit in my house, right? So that's why they were sneaking, and I loved it. Like, whoa. So you had this youth resistance alongside a moral conscious, right? And alongside this gender empowerment story. You hear that? Mm-hmm. That's what's in my ear. That's what's before me. Mm-hmm. Queen Latifah literally has a crown on, and I'm rocking the crown. Mm-hmm. Damn, shout out to my stylist. I just want to drop the name Anya while we recording live. Okay, I'm literally trying to wear a crown. You hear me, you hear my voice fluctuation, right? People are like, you sound familiar. Yeah, I sound like the South Side of Chicago. I know, even though I have all them degrees and commas, I know. And I sound like MC Light.
Mm.
And I sound like Salt and Pepper. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so with that said, what happens is our children now, I just want to prepare y'all for this. They're going to become Cardi B. They're going to become Megan Thee Stallion. They're going to become Beyonce. They're going to become Kamala Harris, right? They're going to become who they hear. So that's just facts. That's not me speaking. That's science.
Woo.
That's science. That's just science. That's why I'm sure with your daughters, I'm sure when they're walking, you're like, oh my God, you sound just like your mama. Why are you walking like that with your hands on your hip? Like you know, why you get there?
What is that?
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
I just look
that's
at
what
it.
we become.
Yeah,
We've seen the Nature Channel where one animal gets lost and another animal finds it, right? You got a chicken that's actually thinking it's a cow. You got a cat that's living and walking like a dog. So with that being said, let's take pause. Many of us, most of us are forced as early as the age of 3. And if you're low income, if you're on welfare, if you're receiving welfare, and I think welfare is okay, I pay my taxes on time. I want your baby to eat. I want you to have housing. You see what I'm saying? I want you to have health care, all of that. I want me to have all of that.
Yeah.
But Dari, if you're low income in this country, as early as the age of 6 weeks, if you want to receive your benefits, you have to put your child in daycare, nursery care, if you want your benefits. And you have to go to work or go to school. So as many of us Black people, as early as the age of 3, are putting our kids in front of a white woman who I just said research shows has the lowest self-esteem than any other group in this country. And you all want to know, I'm talking to the sisters now, Hadara, you might want to cover your ears. And y'all want to know why this grown man sound like a 25-year-old white girl. I hear my sisters talking about it. I'm just saying. I hear my homegirls talking about it. I can't find a man. Man, he sound like a, you know what? And I'm like, right? To think about that.
Okay. So
from the age of 3 to 21, 22 in this country, you're putting your Black boy in front of a white young woman. So we, you know what? Shouts out to the white people who stick with us. Shouts out to the Black families who stick with our public school systems, our private school systems, right? Like we have to. My daughter's at school right now, to be clear, in front of a white woman. Okay, to be clear. Okay, but what I'm trying to say, Hadari, our formal educational system is not going to be enough. At what cost? Psychologically, we are going to come out somewhat broken. So reports are showing, and you all know I'm a clinician, so I see some of the brightest, the smartest Black people, Black women in the world, and talk to them. I get to work with young people. I get to work with people of all racial and ethnic backgrounds. My youngest client is 13. My oldest client is 73. I see men, women, all genders, all racial, ethnic, socioeconomic backgrounds. And I can tell you now, we have more Black women who are formally educated, meaning they have many degrees, right? They're actually reporting higher rates of depression, anxiety, and irritability and any other time in this country, yet we have more education than we've ever had. Black women are also reporting more feelings of isolation and loneliness. There's a direct correlation. I'm talking statistically now, you know, I'm a researcher. There's a relationship between isolation and loneliness and suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts and cardiovascular disease. So this racism, this sexism, it starts in the schools. It's starting there. It's teaching our Black girls to sit still, to be quiet, meaning don't process their emotions or their thoughts, to sit in their pain, to sit in their guilt, to sit in any shame that's being inflicted on them through the curriculum. You see what I'm saying? And it's teaching them how to be fragile and how to adapt to this cultural Holocaustal environment in order to say, I made it through. In order to be able to say, at least now I have a chance of feeding my family one day. It's not healthy for us. So so that's the cost. At what cost? There will be psychological costs.
These are the words of Dr. Venus Evans Winters, our guest here for Educating the Black Child. Hope you guys are out there taking notes. Hope you're getting a lot out of this conversation. A lot of gems are being dropped. Cool. I want to open up the opportunity for people to ask questions. So what would be great for us is if you put any questions that you have in the Q&A, and we're gonna save some time in a few minutes after we have this moment for you to ask, to respond to some of the questions that came up for you during the course of this conversation. But I wanna go into something that we've been kind of tickling throughout this conversation, but it's something that we had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Maisha Wynn about in February, and again with Dr. Bettina Love a couple of months ago. And this is just this paradox of the perception, kind of the narrative of Black girls in the United States. It's criminalization on one side, it's the goddessification on the other. And we have Amanda Gorman as an example of that goddessification. Earlier, I had a slide with Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris and Michelle Obama looking like a superhero. I just want to think about what are the ramifications of this sort of juxtaposition, and thinking about Black girl magic and Black girl realities. We know that Black girls are more likely to get suspended, and yet we see Zalia winning the spelling bee, and we see Amanda Gorman, welcoming the new president of the United States. So what is happening? Like, what are we seeing?
Yeah.
And is this an example of like a social schizophrenia? Is this a social cultural schizophrenia that we're seeing?
You know what? And so remember that we can't judge it, right? But one thing that I'm concerned with personally, and I'll share this, I'm actually fearful of this idea of exceptionality.
Mm-hmm.
Black girl exceptionality, Black exceptionality. And it's dangerous because when I talked about psychological warfare and cultural warfare, that comes out of eugenics movement.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know anything about scientific racism or eugenicism, it's like this idea of human exceptionality, right? Human genius, giftedness, right? And I do study giftedness, but it's actually to interrupt, again, which path, what is your paradigm, what is your lens and prescription for seeing the world? And so what I mean by this like fascination with Black girl exceptionality is dangerous. It's dangerous for two reasons. One, and when I talk about, let me define it first, so how I conceptualize it is I see these posts, the Black girl exceptional prototype, right? It's this, or stereotype, it's this idea of this beautiful Black girl who is an all-A student. She's going to go to Harvard next year. She's only 13 years of age. She plays the violin. She plays the piano, right? And she
could ride a unicycle, dribbling 5 basketballs while spelling onomatopoeia backwards.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And it's like, when can Black girls just be?
Mm.
When can we just be? And she's exceptional compared to who?
Mm.
So we're actually participating in our own objectification. And the assumption is that she got there only through her own, blood, sweat, and tears. When there's a Black mother behind her, more than likely a grandmother, a Black community, right? Oh no, many educators, right? Many community people. And then I say again, at what cost? When was she allowed to just be? And by being, Hadari, again, I'm thinking from a social psychological perspective, the development of the child. I'm not saying we shouldn't invest in the creativity and talents of our youth. I wish that we could, right? But then who are we comparing her to? Who is her yardstick? Who are we failing to leave out of the conversation, right? What are we not focusing on? So when can she just be? When is she just sitting still? When is she being a child? We can celebrate both. We just have to remember, if we're gonna put one person on a pedestal, we also have to be ready to protect those 99.9% of Black girls who aren't unicorns. What do you call them? A unicorn, meeting these standards of exceptionality. Right. And some of this comes out it comes out of the 70s and 80s when Black people want to prove, they wanted to push back against that Moynihan report that said that Black women, they're so strong, they're too vociferous, they talk too much, their men aren't allowed to flourish and do well because of the Black woman, the broken Black woman, the Black woman, she's so strong, she's breaking up the family, So some of this is a trope.
No, it
is a trope. Like, we don't get to see Black girls just being, but I want to celebrate Naomi, right? I want to celebrate Serena Williams, right? I name a whole child after her. My name is Venus, my daughter is Serena. So I do believe in what they're doing and what they represent, but we need a diversity, right? We need a diversity and representation. And also, it does not speak again to the responsibilities of the state, of your government, which is to protect and to serve. So I'm all for Black girl magic. I'm all for Black girls rock. But Hadari, what I want to see is Black girl power. Because the reality is, after the George Floyd killing, after the Breonna Taylor killing, it was actually Black girls, more than likely between the ages of 18 and 25, who was standing the line, who was standing their ground and said, we will fight for the right for Black people to live. We will fight for justice. Yeah. So that we should be calling for power. That's what we need.
On a smaller scale, that's what these women were about. And that, I put up this slide because I think all four of these women have brought up mental illness and sort of the way that they've been treated, and the impact that it's had on them psychologically, mentally, what they've had to do in order to perform at the highest level. It just goes back to how you started this conversation with your research in 2005, right? It's like, what are the costs of being exceptional? What are the costs of being a unicorn? And here's 4 unicorns who have talked about the cost. They've articulated the cost, and the cost that they've articulated are common experiences among Black women in all professions, especially in schools and youth development programs. This idea that you're expected to be something that you're not. You're valued for one part of yourself, but not for all of yourself. Your whole humanity is not taken into question. You're diminished on the basis of what you can do for others, how you can serve their interests and their profits. And so, yeah.
It's what I call in my last book, writing our Black Feminism and Qualitative Inquiry, writing our daughter's body, is the commodification of the Black girl body. It's the commodification of the Black girl body. So we're still, it's like this, what Foucault refers to objectification and subjectification. So here we have 4 brilliant, beautiful Black women and girls, and they're subjects in their own lives, meaning that they have worked hard and earned everything that they are and who they've become. But they're also being objectified. When I see this image, I can see them in that complexity, right? I can acknowledge that humanity. Every last one of these women on this screen and girls on this screen have been called nigga. They've been compared to animals, and they've been referred to as drug addicts.
Or
because of that
Simone Biles.
commodification of their
They
very
call
being.
Simone Biles a disgrace, an American disgrace, even after she won more gold medals for the United States than anybody in history.
How dare her talk about her sexual assault at the hands of a doctor, a physician, a grown man
who worked for the government.
Who worked for the government.
And it was protected by the FBI. Okay, we're not going to go too far down this road. Say, these are the Black girls that are in your programs. These are the Black girls that are in your hallway.
Yes. And they told us, I'm hurting. We didn't listen. They told us I'm tired. They told us I'm depressed.
Mm-hmm. I don't feel safe.
I don't feel safe.
I've got
they hurt me. They hurt me.
Exactly. Yeah. So with that, I also want to think about A Boss Chick's Guide to Mindfulness Meditation. So this is like your solution, or at least a series of advice that you're giving to Black women specifically, but to people also in general, on ways that they can be more mindful in their own practice and perhaps find peace in themselves before they start engaging with our children and with other people. So let's talk about that. Talk about, and I know this comes from your clinical and kind of social work and your ancient spirit, your ancient African spirit. So about this.
Yes, that's. I am my mother's child and my grandmother's child. So if you think about it, not weeping, sharpening my oyster knife. If we go back to that quote by Zora Neale Hurston, that way of living, that way of being, it's a state of I'm enjoying life. I'm enjoying the flavors of life, the taste, and I'm still sharpening the tools that I need in order to survive and to enjoy this life. Now let's juxtapose that to Lawrence Hill's quote, how you gonna win if you ain't right within? How am I gonna win this battle? How am I gonna survive and navigate, white racism, white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism? And how I'm going to help other girls? How am I going to help Black women? I have to start here. I have to start within. How am I going to win? How we going to win if I'm not right within, if we're not right within? And so before we start trying to fix Black girls, I can tell you now, telling them to pull their dresses down, or if they just walk this way and talk this way, if their hair didn't look like that, if they didn't wear bonnets, if they, or telling our boys to pull themselves, pull their pants up, all of this and that. I once heard a brother in the Nation, he said, Hitler wasn't wearing a suit. I mean, Hitler was wearing a suit. And I once heard a sister, we were at an indigenous convening. She's from the south side of Chicago, a mother. She just stood up and excuse my language, Hadari, and I hope I don't offend anyone. This mother from the community said, I'm tired of fixing nigger projects. I heard her because I could translate her. So basically, many of us, especially those practitioners, those of us who work in community spaces, those of us who come in contact with Black children, we do want the best for our Black children. But we have to start with ourselves, Hadari, and we have to stop thinking that Black kids need to be fixed. We're talking about broken systems. We have to stop asking our children to adapt to broken systems. We'll just fit into this confine, this box called white supremacy, and you'll be okay. Because we're not okay. I once went to a school board meeting, and I was looking around the room. It was mostly white teachers, mostly Black parents, and white administrators, white school board members, and me. And there was a situation where I said, how are y'all going to punish this kid and push them out of school and not allow, I asked for a moratorium on school expulsions until they got white supremacy fixed in this nation. So I wanted no Black kids expelled from school, basically, a moratorium. And so I said, I can look at a teacher, Hadari. I can look at an after school worker. And I know, oh, you hung over from last night.
Mm.
Oh, your meds are out of whack. You want to go back to your primary care physician and let them know that you're going to have to change your meds, your dosage.
Mm.
I seen who didn't get enough sleep last night. I can see depression. Depression has a walk.
Woo.
You see what I'm saying? And so before we start fixing our kids, or talking about I'm fixing other people, I am a health and wellness coach too, by the way, because I found out, Dari, that there's a relationship between what we put in our mouths and what we put in our bodies, and that affects our overall mood. Mm-hmm. Right? And we also know, those of us who are part of the healing communities, and if you know anything about, that's not everything you're seeing in social media, y'all, it's not just popular all of a sudden, but this is a real thing. There is a mind-body connection. Now, if you know anything about Kemet spirituality, there is a mind-body spirit connection, and psychologists are just now starting to study that. Like, wow, it's just harder to measure, right? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes Black people, we think this is only going to be about me talking to my therapist, or this is only going to be about me going to see a coach. No, this is also about bringing back, getting into your bodies. We have to get back into our bodies. Okay. And believe it or not, what's the sister, the runner? That's what she was trying to tell y'all. Y'all see me running fast as hell, the young sister up there. Mm-hmm. Y'all see me running fast as hell. By the way, we're the same height. So I just keep thinking there's still hope for me. We're used to the long, lean runner. This girl 5'1". Okay. She told you, so after the reporter mentioned what happened to my mom, she said, whoa, I kind of just left myself. I did what I had to do, and I still got on the track. She was trying to tell you she disconnected in order to survive. So her body was still there, mm-hmm. but her mind wasn't. Yeah, Naomi said that too. She said that in her documentary. She was talking about when mm-hmm. she plays tennis, she goes robotic. And she just takes her mind out of her body, and she only loses when she can't do that. Yeah, so that is it's a skill. We can do that, and we can transcend. Okay, so you have to know when it's okay. You have to know. But the thing is, the trick, Hadar, you cannot do that all the time. Okay, and so when you see, we're talking about meditation. I talk a lot about mindfulness. I am a hypnotherapist. I am trained to hypnotize people for clinical purposes. Right? Black people get scared. They get scared because they're like, oh my God, that's that voodoo stuff, right? Stirring a teacup. You stirring a teacup. And so I always, in this book, I'm actually, and in my work, my body of work, what I try to do is I try to teach Black women and Black youth that these practices do not belong to white people. Mm-hmm. In fact, if anybody from Freud to your common everyday therapist, hypnotist, trained, I just became I've been studying for years this trauma, but as a somatic abolitionist or a somatic practitioner, we now know that we have to do more body work, right? But when you go like to these trainings, that's all mostly white people. Now, I do teach and train to psychiatrists who are predominantly white in the field of trauma. I do work with that particular group. In fact, I am a therapist, by the way, to the largest hospital system here that trains medical professionals. So put that in perspective, Hadari. Don't let the South Side of Chicago accent fool you. Okay. They wanted the best. They got the best. Okay. One of the best. So what I try to do is they'll admit this comes from Africa. That's what Freud said. It came from Africa, right? Contemporaries. Oh no, this is all from Africa, right? And so this is why I always mention science, Hadari. White people didn't discover science. White people don't own science. They do science. Mm. Mm. As we know, it was Africans who began to study their environment. They studied their environment in order to figure out, one, how to get closer to the gods or space, however you want to look at it, the sky. But they also wanted to be in harmony with plant and animal life. So how do I cultivate this land without destroying it? Because we all have to live off of it. Okay. And so what I do in my work and in this book in particular is I bring it home the same way that I'm talking to you and to everybody here today. We can put this psycho spiritual stuff in everyday parlance. So without going in depth, right? I just say, oh yeah, by the way, y'all, our people came up with this, right? Indians don't own yoga, right? Yogites or whatever. This white skinny girl ain't the only one who do yoga, right? You know, and I just say, hey, yeah, by the way, this is ours. It's not in conflict with Islam. Is in fact, it's very aligned with Islam teachings. It's not, you know, in conflict with Christianity. Is very in line. You know, many people who practice Christianity also do meditate, right? People who meditate may pray. And so this is an actual how-to guide. Just it's feasible, it's accessible. I tell women, keep it on the side of your bed. I give it to my girls because I do work with a lot of youth who, again, they're doing pretty well. They're doing what they're supposed to do. They just need help getting back in their body and reclaiming who they are spiritually, so they can get up and fight another fight, run the best race, play tennis, speak on, you know, the conference. It's ours. We can do this without looking so esoteric. And it helps with everything from ADHD, anxiety, anger, addiction, like alcohol addiction, sleepiness. So what we have to, so when you're not aligned with your mind, body, and spirit, girls, women, I'm trying not to curse. I'm from the South Side of Chicago. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to overdrink. We're going to eat junk. We're going to feel angry. We're going to feel irritable. We're going to have sex with the wrong people. We're going to have too much sex, numbing ourselves. We want to turn up life all the time. Yeah. So for what other people take for granted, it actually has a real, it's all related, right? So before we can go out and try to heal other people, we have to heal ourselves first. And we can do it intentionally. And it's easy. It's free medicine.
I think it's very powerful. I think we've had a lot of guests, you know, over the years. I think it was Kevin Powell who talked about his meditation practice. And I just think for youth development professionals, for folks that are out there really trying to figure out how to translate that into your program or into your work directly with Black children, it's like you need to do what we see Dr. Evans Winters doing. Pause. You need to take time to breathe. You need to take time to reflect. You need to have moments of silence. There needs to be some stillness. All of these things that often run counter to the rapid kind of rat race pursuit of education that we engage in our schools and our youth development programs, et cetera. It's like, I got to get all this done in the agenda. We'll add to the agenda some time to not get anything done other than reflection, breathing, sort of a conscious, even if it's a waking meditation, just a moment for these young people to reset themselves and reset their bodies. And I think for Black girls in particular, I think what Dr. Evans Winters is saying is that this is something that is really necessary for Black girls to feel like they can move into their power, like they can move away from other people's expectations of them, and they can use that opportunity to breathe to actually reclaim their bodies and reclaim their consciousness within their bodies. And so I wanted to kind of at least formally kind of wrap with this idea that and you said it, like, it's free medicine, it's free healing, but it's not a practice that we're all accustomed to, aware of, or even trained in. But and it's something that's good not just for the young people, but also for those of us who work in these toxic places. We need time to breathe. The staff meeting is not going to give us that space. We need moments to close the door and reflect on our own practice. We need to take some time to concentrate on our own healing, because we want to be healed before we get in our interactions with young people who need healing. We can't be sick and then expect that we're going to make them healed.
Young people can see that. So something I want to tell this audience in particular, and all of us who are involved in meaning making work, Hadari, anybody who's survived trauma, anybody who's been harmed or injured which is most of us in the United States. The United States is a violent culture. A child especially can spot someone who's not healthy. It's their survival. They have to, right? It's like I once heard a womanizer say to me, I was doing some healing work with them from childhood trauma, childhood sexual abuse, actually. And they told me, Dr. V, I'm like a lion. I could spot a wounded gazelle from a mile away. Mm. And so our children are the same way. It's how they survive their neighborhoods, their schools, many of their family situations. So if that child has ever been a victim of or is a survivor of sexual assault, domestic violence, child neglect or abuse, they can spot you as an unhealthy person. Mm. So they know when you drank too much last night. They know when you're full of shit. Like if you're saying one thing and you're living your life another way. They know when you're not spiritually aligned. It's how the central nervous system operates. So again, I'm not talking esoteric, I'm talking science. Your central nervous system is actually designed to protect you, to predict danger. So what happens is, when that child, and this is the point I was making at that school board meeting, when that child refuses to listen to that teacher, he knows that her dosing is off. Mm. He knows that she's hungover. He knows that she does heroin or meth on the weekends. He knows that she's looking for her next joint. He knows, like, you know what, but Miss Keisha, how you gonna talk about me? How you gonna tell me to act like I got sense? And I know you got 10 baby daddies by 10 different men. Black kids have standards, but we've been taught that we don't have standards. And so now the new standard for Black children is no standards. Mm. Mm. And I'm talking about educationally, spiritually, culturally, and economically. Mm. So let's before we say we're going to go heal somebody else or teach someone else, let's heal and teach ourselves first. And I'm speaking for myself. I'm not perfect. Hadari, I like a good drink. I always know when I'm under stress because I began to crave alcohol. I come from a family of addiction. The men, they love alcohol. Mm-hmm. So when I begin to get stressed or if I'm uncomfortable and anxious, I will begin to crave alcohol. If I want to not drink alcohol, I say, I call them my Oreo cookies. Let me go get my Oreo cookies. And then I know it's time for a reset. Mm. Venus, you just heard about a man who was raped by his stepsister from the age of 9 to she left the house when you were 17. Maybe you need a reset. Yeah. So instead of grabbing them Oreo cookies or craving a drink, let's go meditate. Let's go work out. Absolutely. Right?
Let's go find some healing.
Let's go engage in some healing and reset, restoration.
So that, I think it kind of fits this question here. There is one question in the Q&A. It says, as you mentioned, higher academia comes with suffering of oneself, long life debt, and other toxics. How can we prepare our young people or support them to self-sustain and survive and thrive in a society where we hold higher education as equal to better opportunities, better life, or quote unquote success?
Mm-hmm. So how do we prepare our children? First of all, we have to tell them the truth. We have to go back to that old Black women's way of being. I tell you the truth because I love you. Right? Truth telling. And so we have to equip our children with the truth. I think we always stop at history, right? I think you said this earlier, Hadari. Yeah, we know who made the peanut, right? Right. But you start there, right? Okay, so why can't I think about who made the peanut? That's so bad. But
George Washington Carver.
We know who made the peanut, right? We know that Rosa Parks sat on the bus and refused to give up her seat. But now we also have to tell our children, right? And this is why I teach young people about critical race theory and critical race feminism and intersectionality through a Pan-African perspective. So now we have to teach our young people and ourselves and tell the truth. These systems may not always serve in your best interest. So how can you use this knowledge for good, to do good? How can you use this knowledge because you understand these systems in order to change them? And what will be your purpose? So, Hadari, something I do, and I have my EA here, Janice. I'll be honest with you. Before you can work with me, before you can represent me, before we can go on in any healing or coaching work, you have to sit in the practice. You have to contemplate your purpose. When you know your purpose, you know you'll learn what your values are. When you know your values, then you'll begin to prioritize your time and how you spend it.
That's Dr. Venus Evans Winters. I'm about to do this Democracy Now! Ending right quick. So I'm about to blast through the ending, but I'm gonna ask you, Dr. Winters, if you can maybe type an answer to this question on the Q&A for us. That would be fantastic. And y'all know how I do. Here I go. I got a lot to tell you, though. I got a lot to tell you. So first, read Frantz Fanon. If you need an analysis of colonialism and its impact on Black people, Black lives worldwide, globally, Frantz Fanon is still the bottom line on anything related to the psychological legacy of colonialism. Here are books, again, the top books on the top, 7 books that were either edited or written by Dr. Venus Evans Winters around a number of subjects, but primarily around Black women and girls, feminism and qualitative inquiry, transformation of the educational research experience. I also put 2 books by Dr. Monique Morris, who was referenced a couple of times in this conversation, and a couple of books by Dr. Maisha Wynn, including one that we've been talking about since was published in February, Restorative Justice in Education. We're so thankful that Dr. Venus Evans Winters was here with us. This particular event and just everything that we do at Edutainment for Equity is always often associated with the Life is Living Festival, which is a festival that's happening right now in the city of Oakland. And tomorrow or on Saturday, we have a play, Edutainment for Equity, as an online audio play that's happening. Everybody is invited. You just need to go to Life is Living and register for it. It's free. It's an exclusive opportunity to hear this kind of early 20th century radio program about empathy and Black Lives Matter. And it's a musical and it's powerful. And Candace wrote all the music and I wrote the script with Kat Brooks and some other. It's dynamic theater, but it's all for your ears. So jump on that. That's on Saturday. Our next Educating the Black Child will be with the president of the Akinade Foundation, Latifah Simon, on November 17th. We'll be talking about how we fund racial justice, how our programs and organizations can find and identify funding to actually address social justice issues, not only those that exist in the communities that we serve, but also within our institutions. So that'll be our conversation with Dr. Latifah Simon. Educating the Black Child is presented by Edutainment for Equity in partnership with the San Francisco Department of Children, Youth, and their Families. If you want more information about this event or future events or anything that we do at E4E, please visit our website at edutainmentforequity.com. We're here to upset the setup. We hope you're here to upset the setup. We're about transformative experiences for an equitable world, and we really thank you for your participation in this webinar. Y'all dig? And we will see you soon. Thank you so much.